Hi, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast. My name is Isabel Ross, and I'm the coach at Peak Endurance Coaching. Episode 85 is an interview with sports scientist Abby Coleman. Abby completed her degree in sports and exercise science at the University of Bath. She previously worked at the Porsche Human Performance Centre as an exercise physiologist before joining the team at Precision Hydration. Together, we go over some running myths and listener questions. Are injuries or ongoing niggles causing running to be painful and thus ruining your enjoyment of your sport? Get on top of these now so that you can enjoy running again and get back to preparing for the upcoming race season or for your running holiday. Come in and see the specialists at Health and High Performance, where they will utilise the latest in technology and experience to help you get back to your running best. So head to healthhp.com.au/run to book an appointment and ensure you can run strong and pain-free again. You can also find them on Instagram, Health High Performance, where they regularly post informative videos on how to prevent injuries and how to develop flexibility and strength for running. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Rating, reviewing, and subscribing helps the podcast to grow and more runners like yourself find it. If you enjoy this episode, please do go on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review. If you are interested in taking your running to the next level, email me, Isabel, at peakendurancecoaching.com.au to organise an individualised training plan. Enjoy the interview with Abby.
I'm ready.
Hi, Abby, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you for having me.
You're making yourself a nice coffee there, bright and early in the morning?
Yeah, it is. What's the time here? Let me double check. It's about 7:25 in the morning here. So, yeah, getting the coffee in.
Yeah, it's needed. So you're a sports scientist. Can you tell the listeners what a sports scientist is, what it actually means to be a sports scientist?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's quite a broad term, and it's a good question because of that. I suppose it can mean different things. I never quite know what to give as my job title. Sports scientist encompasses it best, but I said to you before we started recording that you say sports scientist and you get every question about sport, every question related to science, and so you're constantly fielding sort of wild and wacky queries, which keeps you on your toes, but definitely means you need to keep your sort of fingers in a few pies and know about cranberry juice and beetroot juice and compression socks and all these other things. Specifically what I deal with is hydration. So I work for Precision Hydration. Some of the listeners might have listened to Andy before and know a little bit about what that means, but essentially we try and personalize hydration strategies for athletes, looking at what they lose through their sweat, the concentration of their sweat, the volume of their sweat, and match what they lose to what they replace. So that's sort of my day-to-day thing now, is all things hydration, but that does go quite hand in hand with the nutrition side of things and that fueling. You get your hydration right, and the other big lever that you need to nail is your hydration. So we're always talking about the two, and I really enjoy that side of things as well. I think there's a lot more to dive in.
Yeah, as a sports scientist, did you still had to learn all the physiology and the mechanics of sports and all that other sort of stuff? So you've just decided to specialise in hydration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my undergraduate degree was very broad, like you say, biomechanics, some psychology was in there, and then the further down you start to specialise. And for me, my interest was really in the physiology side. I love learning about the body, and I suppose sports science is really looking at the human body and trying to tailor it to performance and health. How can we get the most out of ourselves? And it's all them like minor differences and minor changes and improvements that you can make.
Yeah. And you were talking about how hydration and nutrition go hand in hand, and certainly from my own experiences, I've had the nutrition fine, but because I didn't have the hydration right, the nutrition didn't work. So they really are very much closely linked.
Definitely. That's the topic that any athlete I sit down with, it comes up. I think because the way you can take both in is, a lot of people use energy drinks, and they literally are interlinked for a lot of people, and at times that's fine, and maybe we'll dive into this later in the conversation, and at times it doesn't work. And so I think it's educating athletes about them differences. It's being aware that what you usually do will probably work in a lot of scenarios, but at times, if you're off to go do a really hot ultra, then we might need to look at adjusting these things. So definitely very closely related.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And what is your athletic background in sports or endurance sports?
My sort of background when I was younger and my teenage years was a track runner. I loved track. Middle distance with 8s and 15s, and then in the winter I was out doing cross country, which I did actually really enjoy. I did enjoy the sort of the mud and the guts needed for that. I did a lot of team sports as well. I was one of them all rounders really, and then I did start to take the running more seriously as I got a bit older. But I hit university, and I think it goes one of two ways. You either take it really, really seriously and you fall in with, a coach and things, or it goes the other way and you find alcohol and partying. And I definitely was, unfortunately, the latter. No regrets.
Me too. Yeah, well, no, I agree.
I sort of had a very good routine before uni, and then I sort of lost it and enjoyed myself. But I went on a bit of a journey, and by the end of uni, I'd kind of really found my love for running. I love running. I've always loved running. I never understood. I get asked all the time when I was younger, why do you run? Then people that, for me, they don't know the joy of running if they're asking that question. I love it. So now I'm sort of looking to do more challenges. This year, the plan was to do a triathlon. I work with a bunch of triathletes. It's all we ever talk about. So I was really keen to try one, but next year, with 2020 being what it has been, next year, that's the goal.
Do you think there will be any triathlons in England next year?
I'd like, touch wood, summer, but who knows? I think, staggered start. I don't think it'll be racing as we know it, but I like to think that there'll be some racing. I think people will get inventive. We've seen that this year. I hope so.
Yeah. And that's what we were saying earlier as well, is people have been really creative with coming up with FKTs and different kinds of challenges and, running a certain amount of kilometres a day or whatever it is. So I think that people will find a way to get races back on.
Definitely. Yeah, they've been super inventive this year, haven't they? I can't believe some of the things people have been doing. It's very inspiring. There's literally no reason to sit back and say, well, there's no racing this year, so I'll hang the trainers up
and sit on the couch.
Absolutely not. No.
No, I agree. Now, we also talked earlier about discussing some myths and misconceptions as well as listener questions. I've got a few listener questions, but I thought we'd run through the myths and misconceptions first. And the first one is, can you overload on sodium or have too much? And is too much sodium actually bad for you?
So I really like this question, and this is, again, right up there with sort of one of our most frequently asked questions. I think that's because what we do at Precision Hydration, as I've explained, we try and personalise athletes' strategies based on what they're losing with what they need to replace. And with that in mind, we have different strength electrolyte drinks to try and match their losses with their intake. And our highest strength drink, our pH 1500, has about 2 to 3 times the sodium content of other sports drinks. And I think when you sit with an athlete and they hear that, naturally their next question is, well, can I take too much? Because we're all conditioned that salt and sodium is bad for us and we should be having a low sodium diet. So people hear that and they think, oh, but can I take too much, or can I overload or overdose? And it's a really good question, and I like it because it always means the athlete's thinking about it and they're listening and they're paying attention. Theoretically, yes, you can take too much. As with sort of any nutrient, you can take too much of it.
Yeah.
Will you do that through a sports drink? Very, very highly unlikely. It sounds scary, 2 to 3 times the amount of other sports drinks, but it's nothing versus like a Domino's pizza.
Good point.
It's all relative, and so my answer is no. And if you ever acutely took a little bit too much, so if you did just smash a high sodium containing drink all day and you're sat on the couch, you're not sweating it out, then you might feel thirsty and your body will be craving plain water to balance out, that difference. But nothing sort of too extreme should happen to you if you're a fit, healthy human being.
Yeah. I've also heard that you shouldn't take extra salt in your drinks because all you'll do is sweat it out and become a salty sweater.
See, sweat sodium concentration is rather stable throughout life. It's largely genetically determined, so it won't change, regardless of differences in your diet. It may slightly change. We've seen sort of a change of up to 10 millimole per litre either side. If you eat a very high salty diet for like 3-4 days, you've got a really salt load, or have a depleted salt diet for a few days, it might reduce slightly. But what we've never seen is this drastic change in category. So maybe I should put some numbers on this for listeners. When we measure an athlete's sweat sodium concentration, we see a continuum of as low as around 200 to 300, which is very dilute salt, milligrams of sodium per litre, 200 to 300. And at the other end, super salty, up to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per litre. So a tenfold difference between some people for no other reason other than the fact that their genetics are just different. The salty people, their sweat glands don't reabsorb as much sodium as the non-salty people. And it just is what it is. That will, we could measure that next week, next year, next month, and they'll always stay in these categories. So you've got low, moderate, high, and right at the top there we'd have them classed as very high. So if they eat more salt, it might acutely increase, or if they eat less salt, it might acutely decrease, but we never see this drastic jump on that continuum. It largely is stable. That's good to know. So we always hear that we shouldn't get more than 2% dehydrated because suddenly our performance will drop off. Is it true that more than 2% dehydration is detrimental to performance? I think this needs quite a good answer, because where this all kind of stemmed from, the early research in dehydration, the early guidelines from the American College of Sports Medicine was the recommendations for hydration were you need to replace 100% of your fluid losses. So everything that you sweat out, you need to be putting back in 100%. That's just unrealistic for some people. Some people have sweat rates of 2 to 3 litres per hour. To consume 2 to 3 litres per hour of fluid is completely unrealistic and actually verging on dangerous. That is over drinking. What you run the risk of then is a condition called hyponatremia, low blood sodium levels, and essentially just diluting your salt so extremely in the body and you're just flushing the system. And that can be, in very extreme circumstances, fatal, but it can leave you with headaches, dizziness, confusion, swelling. It's a really extreme condition. So then they revised their guidelines a few years later, I think 2007, when they realised that, perhaps that's not actually the best advice. They went a bit more conservative, and that's where that 2% threshold came in, and they said it was something like drink to no more than 2% body weight loss to avert, I can't remember the exact word they used, but basically to avert poor performance. So to maintain good performance, don't let yourself get any more than 2% dehydrated. And that 2% came from sort of older lab-based studies that they'd done that weren't solely bad. They, we learn a lot from them, but they don't reflect real life. And what I mean by that is what a lot of them did is they took 2 groups and they would drastically dehydrate one group before exercise. They dehydrate them that 2% before they did their exercise. And then lo and behold, the ones that started dehydrated didn't perform well. As we all know, because what athlete goes into a race purposely having dehydrated themselves? It doesn't reflect real life. So whilst it showed that, yes, dehydration is a limiting factor on performance, it's perhaps not true that 2% is like this solid line in the sand. What you actually see out in the field is that athletes can withstand, up to 6% dehydration, and they still perform very, very well. Haile Gebrselassie
That's right,
famously has this huge sweat rate. When he broke the marathon world record in Berlin, he was 10% dehydrated at the end.
Wow.
And it's very tricky, because the argument is to say, well, if he'd been better hydrated, would he have gone even faster? But I mean, he's just broken the world record, so it can't be it can't be that bad for you. So
that's right.
The contemporary kind of theory now is that the elite are better at withstanding this greater dehydration. They're perhaps more accustomed to it, which I quite like the idea of. And I have to say, I think there's probably some legs in that. The fitter you are, maybe the more accustomed you are to, like, your body isn't panicking as much at this greater level of dehydration, because you're more used to it. That's not to say that letting yourself get horrifically dehydrated is a good thing. Dehydration does have an effect on performance, and you do want to maintain good hydration.
Yeah. And especially, in ultras, when you're out for so long, it's even more important, I guess, because you can also be somewhere really remote and be dehydrated. So keeping on top of it is important. And, many of these tests on hydrations, on anything in sports, have been done on men. So do women and men have different hydration needs? Or do we even know if they do, really?
I love this question. I think to start, we need to know more, because as you've said, it's just a problem in the field. We just need more research on women. I think this year I've seen a lot of talk about this. It really does seem to be getting more airtime, that people are not happy about the discrepancies between males and females, and researchers, study groups always use the excuse of, well, it's easy to recruit men, and list all these reasons. And I think people are just like, have had enough now, and that's just rubbish. There's so many fit women out there. It's not that hard. Let's do these studies. We need to know more. So I think we're going to start to see a change in the tide there. Touch wood, I hope. On the hydration front, my experience of working with athletes, I've never made a difference in the advice I give an athlete based on their sex. I think there's more important factors to look at on an individual level. So I look at the person's size, the person's sweat composition, their sweat rate, what sport they do, what level they compete at, what environment they're in. I think all these other factors have a greater influence on their hydration strategy and the advice I give them than their sex. However, from the sports science side, having a look at the literature, I do think that there are subtle changes in a woman's fluid and sodium balance over their menstrual cycle. I just don't think them differences are great enough to warrant a change in their strategy, in what we'd recommend. I'd say at times, based on what phase they're in their menstrual cycle, they might consume a greater volume of fluid, but not what's the composition of that fluid doesn't necessarily need to change, if that makes sense, Isabel. So I think there's subtle differences, but not enough to warrant, women should be doing this and men should be doing that. I think it's close enough that we look at them other factors first, and they make a bigger difference.
That's the individual as opposed to as a group. So that would be
absolutely
more appropriate anyway. So can you drink just pure water to thirst, and that will do the trick, and you'll be fine for racing?
I think
or training
at times. Yeah, at times I'd say yes. And this phrase, it depends, we use a lot. And I think if, across sports science, that phrase should be used a lot more. It depends, because the individual variation is massive. It's very hard to give blanket statements and blanket recommendations for anything. So I think it depends with the water one. If it's a mild, cool day, you're not going to be sweating too much. You're doing a short session, you're doing a tempo, like a threshold run, then plain water should be absolutely fine. You might create some kind of sodium deficit if you're sweating a bit, but nothing so drastic that you're not going to just put that sodium back in the food and the meal that you have after that run. So at times plain water, there's absolutely times when plain water is okay. Times when you might want to be rethinking that is when you're sweating more, you're out for longer, it's a hot day, you're racing. Them kind of scenarios, circumstances, is when you might want to be thinking about your sodium losses and putting something back on board.
Yep. All right. So now some listener questions. And one of the listeners wants to know, what's the most efficient way for a cool climate runner to adapt to training and racing in the tropics?
That's a good one. That is a good one. So I think when you're thinking about going out and being in the heat, it's about what you want to do in the heat. Are you going on vacation and you just want to keep fit, like do a couple of workouts to keep fit, or are you talking about going into the heat and racing? If you want to go and perform in the heat, you definitely need to work at it. It's not something you can just rock up and expect to run how you have been in the cool. Certainly, I think that's where this person's question is possibly coming from. It sounds like he wants to go and race.
Yeah, I know he's actually moved. So he's living somewhere that's quite hot now and tropical.
Fantastic.
So yeah, he'll be doing all his training and racing there.
So if he's there for good, he'll naturally start to acclimate. So what you want to be getting, you want to be getting these heat adaptations. And you can do that two ways: heat acclimation or heat acclimatization. Heat acclimation is gaining them heat adaptations through an artificial environment. So it's like taking hot baths, going in the sauna, running with more layers on if you're in the cool, going in a heat chamber, artificially raising that core body temperature to induce greater sweating. Heat acclimatization, is doing it in a natural environment. So going out to that hot place and running in 30, 35 degree heat, whatever it is. But the aim of the two is the same. It's to increase that core body temperature and induce profuse sweating. So that's what you want to do to gain heat adaptations. And you start to see, when you become adapted to the heat, you start to see a lowering in your heart rate, a lowering in your core body temperature. You begin to sweat earlier, an earlier onset of sweating, and you sweat greater. Your sweat rate actually increases because sweating is your cooling mechanism. So it's that cooling mechanism getting better. I think people tend to think of sweating lots as being a sign of being unfit, perhaps. Stereotypically in your head, the person at the back is the one that's sweating loads, they're red in the face and they're struggling. But actually, to sweat a lot is quite good. The fitter we get, we sweat more because it's our cooling mechanism becoming more efficient. Your cardiac output and your stroke volume will get better. So some advice to how someone would do that: as I say, saunas, baths, more layers if it's a cool day, but just get out there as well. Just if he's in the hot climate, just get out there, start easy and build up. Be really conscious of pacing. To begin with, you won't be able to go out and run at the same intensity as you were back home or back in the cooler environment. So just ease into it. Think about the timing of the day. Don't go out in like the midday sun. Try and sandwich the day early in the morning or late in the evening to begin with, and again, slowly ease yourself into them greater temperatures. Wear appropriate clothing, put some sun cream on, and just be smart. If it, like, the best way, if you're going out to race in a hot climate, the most efficient way to heat adapt for that is to get yourself in that climate. Get out there early for a couple of weeks if you can, 10 days a week, whatever you can sort of factor in, and just get out in the environment. And it does take between 7 and 10 days to acclimate to the heat.
What about because not just when you're running, but the rest of the day, should you be sitting in an air-conditioned room, or should you be, trying to get used to the heat of the day, regardless of whether you're running or not?
I think it'd be good to stay in the environment if you can. I mean, take that with a pinch of salt. When you finish that run, you may need to go and cool down.
Yes.
But throughout the day, It's good to stay in the environment, get used to it, absolutely, and but just be sensible, because if it is really hot, really humid, you will just be passively sweating throughout the day. So you do need to be really on it with your hydration, and be aware of that upregulation in fluid loss just throughout the day, not just around your training session.
Yep. All right, next question, salt tablets. When should you consider taking salt tablets? If you're running longer than a set period of time, or if you're a heavy or light sweater, or are they not necessary? Or, I mean, I think we're like salt tablets are they still used much as salt on their own kind of thing?
I think I work with quite a few athletes that use them. I would say it comes back to, firstly, do you need that salt or not? Let's assume that a person does. We've got someone that's really sweaty, they've got a high sweat sodium concentration, so we're looking at their strategy for this ultra that they're doing. They're a great way of getting sodium in efficiently, because you've not got to, it's not mixed in with the fluid. You can rely on aid stations and picking up bottles of water and swallowing them with a mouthful. You just got to be more conscious with the salt tablets that you have got to be getting that fluid in alongside them. Another one is, again, if I'm working with a triathlete and they're starting the bike with their pre-mixed up bottles, once they've gone through them, rather than faffing with mixing up more bottles, they may just decide to take some sweat salt capsules with them and move on to them once they're out of their pre-mixed fluid, setting themselves up for the run. So I think there is a time and a place for salt capsules. Again, I'd sit down with an individual and work out whether we feel it's the right strategy for them or not. Yeah.
And would you, if you were planning on taking them, so he's also asking, when would you take them? Would it be like, if I know I'm doing an ultra, would I say, so I'm going to be out, let's say, for 8 hours, would I start taking them straight away or wait till 2 or 3 hours in?
It depends what you've done pre. We're very big on pre-hydration. We have a great blog on how to start hydrated, and perhaps we can link that in the show notes or something, and people can go and have a read on that more. But you want to be, ideally your strategy, you don't wait until you're dehydrated or depleted on sodium. In a long race, like an 8-hour ultra, you do need to be more proactive. So I would encourage someone from the off to be in hour 1 taking some sodium, some fluid, so certainly not waiting till you're in this deficit to then act. But listen to your thirst on the fluid consumption. The longer your event gets, an ultra like an 8-hour, you do need to be more mindful, and you might build in a bit more of a plan with your drinking than, say, a 3-hour marathon, because 3 hours, you'll probably have a few sips, but you can get away with it more. And I always, if people can afford to get away with it, 8 hours, it's going to trip you up if you're not mindful of it at all, and if you're just really laissez-faire about it. So starting to build in a bit more of a structure and being more mindful that, okay, each hour I want to be drinking about a bottle, having that in your mind, having a kind of, it's not set in stone by any means. Again, listening to your body always on what it's craving. Is it water? Is it a bit more salt? Is it calories, etc., etc.? But you definitely need to be more mindful in them longer events than the shorter ones.
Yep. Next, is it true that during taper and post-race we need to increase our fruit and vegetable intake because when we slow down or reduce training after weeks of building up, our immune system is compromised and therefore we will get sick? So this person has been told by someone that they need to increase their fruit and veg intake during the taper, which, I'm not always mad keen on increasing your fibre during taper, but anyway, and post-race because of, the immune system.
Yeah, good question. I wrote a blog a few months ago at the start of all this coronavirus about the immune system. I find it really interesting. Again, like you, Isabel, I wouldn't recommend specifically, I would never say to an athlete, one thing to do in your taper is increase your fruit and vegetables because of the high fibre content. I'd just say that's a good thing to be doing in general, a good volume of fruit and vegetables in your diet. Yeah, I would actually avoid too much fibre in the close proximity to your race, because anyone that's done that has probably not ended too well. On the immune system, though, that post-race effect on the immune system is really interesting, and it is true. Exercise is actually very good for the immune system, and it was kind of misinterpreted when all the studies were first done on it, because the immune cells, you see an influx in the blood during exercise. You see this massive spike, and then we stop exercising and they drop. They all disappear from the blood. And so people called it this open window theory, where because we've got these diminished immune cells for 2 to 3 hours after exercise, they thought we were more susceptible to infections, to picking up coughs and sneezes, etc. And after 2 to 3 hours, they slowly start to come back to normal. Actually, what we know now is they all disappear from the blood in that period, because they shoot off to places like the lungs and other areas where the body thinks we might have become sort of more vulnerable to pathogens. The lungs being a good example, because our breathing rate increases when we're exercising, the likelihood of us inhaling something nasty increases. So it's actually the body being very clever and sending these immune cells off to where it thinks it needs them, so that should we have been exposed to anything not so nice, it's there ready to attack it and prevent us being ill. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that actually exercise is very good for us, as we all know. But it is true, there have been a few studies done that show, there's a half marathon one, again it might have been the Berlin Marathon, that runners do seem to get more ill after something like a marathon or a half marathon. They followed up with people and they said, have you experienced any of these symptoms? And it was around a third of people were experiencing something like a cold. Again, limitation of that is it's just like hearsay. No one was tested to see if it was actually a cold. It's people saying they've got a bit of a cough or got a bit of a sniffle. So we don't know for sure how accurate that is. But I think there are factors around exercise that can make you more vulnerable to disease. If you really push yourself, you let yourself get glycogen depleted, if you don't wrap up warm afterwards, if you let yourself get cold, if you don't rehydrate properly, if you don't sleep well afterwards. So I think if you manage your training and your racing really well and you look after yourself, exercise is great for the immune system. You're not going to get ill. If you are constantly energy depleted, you're not taking enough calories, you're running low all the time, you're not rehydrating, you're not resting enough, you're basically using exercise to run yourself down, I think there is a likelihood that you will get ill. But in general, exercise is good for the immune system.
Yep, I agree with that. Next, what is the effect of a job where we do a lot of standing, walking, lifting and bending? Can this be sort of included as training? Do we need to take it into consideration when planning our training?
I would say yes. It's all load, isn't it? So you do need to factor in how busy you've been in a week. If you're having a really manual week and you feel tired, that is all stress being put on the body. And so I would encourage an athlete to tailor back on their training if they're having a heavy work week. Because it's all stress of some kind, be it physical, mental, emotional, etc., etc. It's actually fantastic to have a manual job for health. I had this fantastic lecture that I'll never forget back at university, and it was looking at who is more healthy. Is it the manual labourer, the landscaper out in the garden all day for 8 hours, or is it the office worker that sits down all day but then goes to the gym and does a really intense 1 hour? And actually it's the manual labourer, the one that's on his feet for 8 hours. Okay, it's low intensity relatively, unlike the gym worker that goes and does 1 hour and smashes it high intensity, but it's that person that's just burning through calories and through energy all day that is considered the better alternative. So absolutely factor in what you're doing in life into your training load. And if you're feeling run down, take a look at the whole picture, not just those training sessions you're doing.
So would you say that someone who, for instance, works as a gardener, a landscape gardener or something like that, would perhaps have a lower mileage than someone who works in an office?
Possibly. Again, I'd want to sit down with them and
Yeah.
really delve into their goals and what they're doing. But certainly, that will have an effect on how many calories they should be consuming and when they want to be planning their big sessions. If they work Monday to Friday and they're really busy, but they want to do, right, when should I do my hard session? Well, maybe Sunday then, give yourself that day to recover and then smash Sunday, because if you try and do that on Friday evening, it's just not going to work. So yeah, it gets boring, but you've got to sit down with a person and look at all the individual factors.
Once again, it depends.
It depends. I'm sorry.
No. No, it's absolutely true. Is the 10% rule on increasing mileage really true?
I saw an article about this on Twitter the other day, and I should have clicked on it and read it. But I'm going to say I don't feel in the position really to comment, Isabel, on that one. I don't know enough about it to say.
Yeah, because once again, it seems like an arbitrary rule, just like the 2% dehydration. And, seeing as we're all different, it seems unusual that everyone would have the same rule.
Exactly. What will work for some people won't necessarily work for you. And that's one of them lessons that I tell most athletes is the worst thing you can do is look at what your friend's doing that's working for them and try and replicate it. Just because it works for them, by no means it will work for you. Exactly. Stick with what works for you. That's the golden thing that we're all looking for as athletes, is this equation that works, be it nutrition, hydration, training, whatever it is. If it's working, stick with it. Of course, analyze it and refine it and see, can it be a little bit better? Always looking to optimize things. But just because someone else is doing something, don't change up everything that's ever worked for you because matey over here is suddenly having great success because he's doing X, Y, and Z,
Yep. No, that's fair enough. You did sort of touch on this before. You were saying when getting used to running in the tropics, you should change your pace. And that was one of the questions. Say it's, like in Australia, we're coming into summer now. And so when running in the heat of summer, what sort of leeway should we give ourselves when it comes to pace? Like, obviously we shouldn't be, certainly at the start of summer, aiming for the same paces, but like, should we just then plod? What should we do?
Yeah, good question. My first job was as an exercise physiologist at the Porsche Human Performance Lab, and we had a heat chamber. And we'd have lots of conversations around this because come session one, we'd get them on and we'd start them walking actually. But the heat chamber was like 30 plus degrees. It was really tense, and the humidity was very high in there. It's a very small room, and it got very humid. And you get them athletes, they just couldn't get their head around that. Why would I want to walk? I'm here for my session. I want to push it. But it is so intense, the effect that heat has on the body. Anyone will know that first summer day, particularly coming out of like off season perhaps, and you try and go out for your run and it really hits you. And slowly we'd build up a plod. So again, I can't put an arbitrary value on that reduction in pace. Just know it will be there. I would have a look at your numbers, really go off feel. You need to be really good at listening to your body. I would go without any music so you can really listen to your breathing, really try and be in tune with your body and how you're feeling. If you're someone that uses heart rate, perhaps have a look at your heart rate. I would your heart rate will, if you try and go out at your normal pace, your heart rate will be higher. And that's because your body is battling, trying to supply both the muscles and the skin with blood to keep you cool. The muscles want blood because they want the oxygen to keep fueling exercise. The skin wants blood to cool us down. So the heart rate has got to increase to meet both demands. Normally it's just being sent to the muscles, but now it's got to meet two organs as such. So a good guide would be to go out and try and keep that heart rate where it normally is. And so you will have to dial back the pace in order to meet that. That might be a good starting point, but really the best advice I can give is just listen to your body to begin with. It will be frustrating. Athletes are so frustrated not being able to stick at their normal pace, but you will get back there as you adapt. And as I say, it only takes 7 to 10 days, 2 weeks, and you can be running at that pace, and heart rate will have come back down, breathing rate will be down, you'll be feeling more comfortable, it won't be feeling as hard. So it will come, you just a little bit of patience in the heat.
Yep. The last question is, how many ultra races a year should we do as A races, like as our, number one sort of priority races? You hear of many ultra athletes, doing just racing pretty much constantly. What's actually, and you hear about top marathoners would only do 2 marathons a year. So what is the sort of I know you can't give a definitive number, but, in general, should we be doing 10 to 20 ultras a year, or is there a sort of more of a lesser number?
Yeah, I think it'll be a lesser number is my gut. Again, I'm going to be really boring and say individual. I'd look at a person's training history and sort of see what load that they can take. If it's someone that's sort of more on the fragile end of the spectrum, they're not quite so good with load, or then you'd be looking at a lesser number perhaps. If there's someone that's historically quite robust, then they could perhaps be looking at doing a few more. But
even then, even someone who's robust, I can imagine that doing too many races, still there's a point of diminishing returns. You can't give you 100% every time, can you?
No, absolutely not. So it take careful planning down to the individual. It would be, in my head, 2 is like per year is a pretty good number. I
mean, it's okay to do other ones. It's all
absolutely
races.
Absolutely, as your A race, because it's all the build up, and it's the time needed afterwards. When you start to look at that over the year and you start to plan that out, you put too many more in than that, and it all starts to. There's not a lot of time between them when you think of that build up and that taper and time afterwards, and so absolutely, you can have a few B races in there, but talking about A races, it's 2, maybe 3 if you're. If the timings work.
No, I'm definitely in agreement with that. I think some ultra runners get really excited about racing, which I get, and especially coming into next year after having not really raced much, I think there'll be a lot of over racing going on as soon as races start up again.
I'm sure people just can't wait to get out the gates. You're so eager.
But maybe just do some of those races just for fun, and and still focus on a couple of A races.
Good advice.
All right, was there anything else that you thought we should talk about, or
I think we've done all the myths, haven't we? We've busted some good myths. They were some good questions from the audience. No, I'm happy. I finished my coffee. It's
that whole jug.
It's gone.
Oh my golly!
Time for some breakfast.
Oh that'd be nice. Well, it's time for dinner for me. So there you go. We're at the opposite ends of the day.
We are. It's bonkers, isn't it? I think is it about 16 hours difference at the moment?
Well, no,
as much as that.
No, it's
time is it there now?
It's just after 7 p.m. and you would be just after 8. It's 11 hours.
After 8. 11 hours. Oh, okay, not so great.
You're just minus 11 hours, I believe. So I'm not that far in the future.
No. It is weird though, isn't it? You've done the day, I'm starting the day. It is bonkers. Right.
I know, it's crazy. And yet talking to you and really we had a little bit of internet issues before, but really it's so good. You wouldn't know you're on the other side of the world. So it's pretty amazing.
It works well, doesn't it? It works well. 2020, the year of Zoom, and
I know. I remember the first time I used Zoom, I was nervous. Now I'm an old hand.
So I had this conversation yesterday with some friends. I said I hated it to begin with, and now it's just so natural, so normal.
That's it, exactly. It's funny, isn't it? We adapt. Just like we adapt to the heat. We adapt to technology.
That's a good round off.
It is.
Putting it all together.
That's it. All right. Thank you so much for spending some time chatting with us and answering questions.
Not at all.
We really
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Yeah, we'll put the the pre-hydration blog in the show notes, and also there is a discount code that I was told about that I'll put in the show notes too for listeners as well.
Yes, fantastic. I think it gets you 15% off your first order or something like that. So if anyone, if this has resonated with anyone, go check out the website, precisionhydration.com. We've got loads of good blogs along, similar lines of how to start hydrated, during, after, all of that. And
it's getting hot here in Australia, so I think it's really important for athletes here to focus on that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention on that, you can book at the moment a one-on-one call with one of the members of the team. So if someone wants to have a conversation about, because I've said it so many times in this chat, it's all individual. We want to talk to the athlete. What is it that they do? What is their sweat rate like? And you need to kind of have that conversation. We are doing video calls at the moment, so you can come and talk to us on Zoom like we're doing now. We're all old naturals.
Thank God for Zoom. Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that sounds really good. Yeah, and of course the time difference isn't that bad, so easy enough to set up.
Yeah. No, we can work it out.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Isabel. Take care.
Bye. You too. Bye.